When you think about all the different groups of people who lived near Israel, the Moabites are one of the most interesting and troubling. People who read the Bible will notice that they are always on the edges of Israel's history, sometimes as a military danger and sometimes as a spiritual temptation. Every once in a while they are a part of something much bigger than they could have dreamed. How can a group of people who were born in shame be used to save others? And how could someone from a family that the law rejected become an important part of God's plan? There are answers to these questions that are not obvious. They are buried in the dark beginnings of a family tree and in the amazing reach of God's love. Soon after fleeing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, a judgment that erased the maps of 2 whole cities, Abraham's nephew Lot went to a remote area with his 2 daughters to find safety. Even though the small town of Zoar looked safe at first, it soon made them afraid. Their distrust and pain from what they had seen made them want to hide away from people. This is how they found a cave in the hills. It was a rough place to hide, but it was safe enough for people who remembered seeing fire fall from the sky. In that cave, by itself and in silence, a desperate plan began to take shape. Because Lot's daughters thought there were no more men in the world, they chose to get their father drunk and lie with him in order to have children. They didn't talk to God. They didn't ask for help. They did something that would be remembered for hundreds of years because they were scared, confused, and had a skewed sense of how to stay alive. Moab was born from this evil union. That's what the son of the oldest daughter was named, and a country was born with him. Moab grew and had more people. The Moabites, who were his people, lived east of the Dead Sea. The land was rich and the hills were safe, but their identity was always tied to the stain of where they came from. And no one forgot about that spot. In Deuteronomy 23:3, the Torah says that no Moabite can ever meet with the Lord's people, not even to the 10th generation. It was a harsh term that showed how they were seen, as a dirty group of people who didn't deserve the holy promises made to Israel. There were many times in the Old Testament when Israel and Moab were at odds with each other. The Moabites didn't give the Israelites any food or water as they marched toward the Promised Land. Instead, they hired Balaam to make God's people suffer. Later, they led the Israelites to do evil and idolatrous things. All of this only added to the refusal that had been written since the country was founded. But in the middle of all the criticism and fighting, an exception showed up like a bright light out of nowhere. It was the name of a Moabite woman that people would one day whisper with respect: Ruth. Her story doesn't start here, but steps are being taken to get to her. Even though Israel had a shameful past, the God of Israel was already planning something that no one could imagine. A story of loyalty, redemption, and ultimate purpose would begin from that base, which was built on sin and dishonor. Take a moment to like and subscribe to our station before we go on with this exciting story. More people need to hear this kind of lesson, because it helps us show that God's kindness can reach even the most unlikely hearts. If this story is already speaking to you, please say "Grace always finds a way" in the comments. Let's work together to spread faith and hope. Also, please leave a super thank you if you want to help this job. We can keep telling more Bible stories and spreading this message of faith and hope thanks to your gift. Thank you so much for your help. We'll keep going on our journey today. Lot and his daughters were forced to flee to a place with quiet rocks and thick shadows. They carried more than memories of damage with them. They carried the weight of an unknown future. They lost everything: the city where they lived, the men their daughters were dating, and Lot's wife, who turned salty when she saw him again. There was no way to go. No one was there. The mountain and the sound of a world that had been destroyed by God's vengeance were all that was left. In this complete nothingness, where hopelessness had taken its place, Lot's daughters made a very bad choice. The two grew up in a bad neighborhood. The bad air in Sodom had changed the way they thought about relationships, morals, and family. After getting dirty in the thoughts and being scared to death, the oldest daughter suggested the impossible. She used smart words to persuade her sister that there was no other way to save their family tree, which they said was in danger of dying out. They drank their own dad down, not just once, twice in a row. Lot didn't know what was going on because he was confused. Each one slept with him in turn, and 2 boys were born from this unholy union. Moab was the name of the oldest child, who was born from the first daughter. The other was called Ben-Ammi and was the child of the younger daughter. Both would grow up and make their own groups of people. The leader of the Moabites would be Moab. In the past, the Ammonites were related to Ben-Ammi. The story doesn't change the facts. It shows them in a hard way that the Moabites were not created because of a promise or a gift. There was no call or promise from God. There was wrongdoing, pain, shame, and lying. The cave, which was supposed to be a safe place to stay, was the site of a terrible sin. And it would be hard to forget this dark start. This event would stay in the minds of Israelites forever, and it would be the start of hundreds of years of distrust and fighting. While Israel could look to Abraham and see a father picked by God, the Moabites felt ashamed when they thought about where they came from. The roots of them were not in loyalty, but in breaking the rules. Still, the family tree grew. A whole group of people came from a broken home. The Moabites lived in the hills to the east of the Dead Sea. A society grew. People built towns, and they found their own identity. But the past was always there to haunt them. After years of traveling in the desert, Israel finally made it to the Promised Land many years later, where they met the Moabites, not as strangers, but as cousins who lived far away. They were cousins, with only a weak but clear family line between them. On the other hand, there was pushback instead of acceptance. Instead of working together, there was anger. The Moabites didn't put out their hands. They didn't offer a place to stay, food, or a safe way to get there. Instead, they tried to stop the people of God from moving forward. The children of Lot and the heirs of Abraham did not get along when they got back together. Instead, there was tension. Furthermore, this added to the idea that the Moabites were against God's plans for Israel from the very beginning. Their behaviors now showed that they came from a dirty place. But God does not end history, even though it had such a bad start. Takes a look, he waits. And as we'll see in the next few pages, he seems to pull tools to change our fates from places we least expect them. There are ways for kindness to grow, even when things go badly at first. When the Israelites got close to Moab, they didn't find anyone to be friendly or helpful. Instead, people were uneasy and scared when they arrived. The Moabites were scared when they saw so many people, led by God and surrounded by mysterious signs. Especially King Balak, who made bad choices because he was stressed. Instead of building troops or trying to reach an agreement, he bet on a weapon that couldn't be seen, but that he thought would be very powerful: mental cursing. Chapters 22-24 of the Book of Numbers make this attempt at ruin very clear. Fearing the strength of the Hebrews, Balak sent agents to find Balaam, a man known for speaking in a mysterious way and predicting events that, at the time, were reported to have come true. He told him he would give him good things if he agreed to curse the Israelites. It looked like the goal was easy: use words to hurt people. But Balaam did not work for himself. Despite his desire to accept the king's call, he was stopped by something he did not expect: the God of Israel himself. On the way to the place where he was going to curse, Balaam saw something that he could not believe. He had been good to his donkey for years, and it saw something he couldn't: an angel in the way. In a wonder that had never been seen before, the animal spoke like a person and warned Balaam of the danger that was coming. It was clear from this story that Balaam would not be the one to change the course of events. Every action was being planned by God. In order to reach his goal, Balak took Balaam to 3 different spots, all of which had a great view of the Israelite camp. Every time the seer opened his mouth to curse, the exact opposite happened: strong blessings, words of praise, and promises of success for the Israelites. Balak was fuming with anger. The first plan had failed horribly. The spiritual wall around God's people couldn't be broken by any threat. Every time someone tried to use magic against Israel, they ran into an obvious truth. No spell can hurt someone who is protected by the Most High. Even though Balaam didn't want to be God's spokesperson, he ended up doing so, and even spoke about the Messiah without fully knowing what they meant. But when the curse didn't work, something even smarter came along. Balaam knew that a straight attack would not work, so he offered moral seduction, which would be more subtle but still harmful. If outside forces couldn't beat the Israelites, maybe they could be harmed from the inside. Now that the Moabites knew this, they started to use their women to get the men of Israel to come to them. Party invitations, sex, and strange faith practices all turned into carefully planned bait. For some reason, the plan worked amazingly well. A lot of Israelites fell. They mixed with the Moabites, worshipped their gods, and made a symbolic sacrifice to Baal-Peor. Army might not have been able to do what wooing did. The Lord was very angry with his people, and a terrible disease spread through the camps. There was betrayal from within. People had made choices that broke the holy bond. Israel's past in the desert shows that this was one of their worst falls. It shows that the biggest threat often doesn't come from outside, but from holes that people make when they don't follow the rules. Even though they didn't have swords, the Moabites were able to hurt Israel where it was weakest, in its promise to God. Part 25 of the book of Numbers talks about one of the worst falls the Israelites had on their way through the desert. The episode called Baal-Peor showed how the enemy got through when they couldn't use force or curses to win. They did it by seducing people. The text says that a lot of Israelite men slept with Moabite women. It wasn't just personal ties. The Moabites also asked them to take part in the ceremonies of their gods. The offer seemed harmless. A meal together, a cultural event. But it was really a trap that would kill them. The Israelites ate the offering made to Baal and then bowed down to him, showing their faith in a false god. In a clear way, this was not following the Lord. After getting the law at Sinai, seeing the sea part, and being fed every day with manna, the people now bowed down to a god from another country. It was seduction that worked instead of swords. And the result happened right away. Israel came under a very strong attack from God's anger. The camp was hit by a terrible plague that killed many people in just a few hours. A lot of people died quickly, and the town fell into chaos. But God's justice wasn't just about the plague. People with bravery and zeal had to put an end to the rebellion. Then Phinehas, the grandson of the high priest Aaron, showed up. He showed a lot of loyalty by killing an Israelite man and a Midianite woman who were disobeying the Lord during a time of trouble. Phinehas was very active, not because he hated anyone in particular, but because he was very passionate about the bond with God. And it was this very thing that stopped the plague. The Bible says that the plague stopped at that moment, protecting the rest of the country. The loyalty of one man kept the whole thing from falling apart. They learned from this that their worst enemy wasn't always outside the walls. The real danger often came from inside their hearts, when they gave in to sin and worshipping idols. As long as they stayed true to the Lord, no force, curse, or foreign sword could hurt them. However, a pagan holiday, an alluring offer, or a time when one's faith is weak could lead to disaster. Through the way they changed people, the Moabites became a constant spiritual threat. Baal-Peor had an effect that went beyond that one point in time. It went all the way into Israel's laws to keep reminding people of how bad that fall was. In chapter 23, verse 3 of the book of Deuteronomy, God made it very clear that neither Ammonites nor Moabites could enter the meeting of the Lord. Not only did this sentence punish them right away, it also made it official that the children of Moab could not join the company of Israel. The law made it clear that those people could not fully enjoy the gifts that were meant for God's people. This order brought back memories of deception and the bad things that happen when you worship false gods. The Moabites were not only Israel's mean neighbors, but they also constantly showed them how dangerous it was to turn away from the Lord. The law told people not to mix, not to be fooled, and not to forget what happened at Peor. It was meant to keep the vow pure and stop history from happening again. So, Moab's punishment became a lesson for people who would come after. The order was clear and could not be changed. God told Moses that the Moabites could not be a part of the Lord's gathering. This rule sounded like it would last forever. There was more to it than just a social or political bloc. It was an official split from the covenant people and a spiritual ban. Not being allowed to join Jehovah's group meant not being part of the promises and not being able to pray, receive gifts, or spend time with other Israelites. Even to the 10th generation, which was used in the command, meant more than just counting off the heirs. It meant forever in Hebrew. It wouldn't end at a certain time. This mark would be on the people of Moab from the time they were born until they died. They were no longer together. This choice wasn't made by accident or because of bias either. The reason for this stern sentence comes from the Bible itself. The book of Deuteronomy 23:4 talks about how the Moabites were rude to Israel as they crossed the desert. Instead of offering bread and water, which is what people of the same group would normally do, they cursed. They hired Balaam so that they could destroy Israel not with swords, but with words. Even though God stopped them, this show how much Moab hated God's people opened their hearts. Because of this, the rule can't be seen as a move made on the spot. It was the right thing to do in response to real acts. Moab not only didn't care, it deliberately tried to get in the way of God's plan, which was evil. This is why the ban had two meanings: to punish and to protect. People who betrayed them would be punished, and Moab's power would be kept from spreading. After all, they had already shown that they could hook people spiritually. They fell at Baal-Peor because they were too close. In other words, exclusion wasn't just a thing of the past. It was a mental wall built in the present to protect the future. It was said that Israel should be a holy country, set apart for the Lord. When you mixed with people who worshipped other gods and encouraged bad behavior, your faith could weaken. The harsh step was meant to protect Israel from small but harmful pollution and keep it clean. That seemed to seal the Moabites' fate. Because they came from a family of close relationships, their past was already full of shame. Because of what they did recently, they were called enemies of the oath. Now they were no longer in God's presence because of a holy decision that ended the sentence. Many people thought that the Moabites were spiritually bad. There was no sign that they might get another chance. The wall was tall and solid, and it was written by God himself. What I saw was a door that was locked and couldn't be opened. There was no way in for the children of Moab. They were outside, far away, and marked. The promises made to Abraham, the treaties with Israel, and the prophet's words were not for them. In this situation, hope seemed like something that only people born under the sign of luck could have. It looked like the Moabites would be turned away. Still, as we'll see later, what seemed like the end would turn out to be a wonderful gift from God, because kindness always finds a way, even when it seems like there is no way back. But for now, the Moabites' past was stuck in a rule that sounded like a death sentence. Even though the order seemed to set the Moabites' fate in stone, God's plan was never limited to hard and fast rules or human readings. In reality, what seemed like a final decision was just a quiet start to something great. During hundreds of years of rejection, God was getting ready to teach one of his most important lessons. Kindness can grow even in places that seem cursed. During one of the worst times in Israel's history, the time of the judges, this turnaround began to take shape. As time went on, there were rounds of sin, oppression, and turning away from evil. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Back then, in this crazy place where nothing seemed to be going anywhere, a small story started to take shape, almost forgotten in the midst of all the big events. However, this story is not about war or kings. It is about loss, choices, and being made right again. During a time when food was scarce, it all started in Bethlehem, which is strangely named House of Bread. Because they were hungry, an Israelite family did the unthinkable. They moved to Moab, which was thought to be cursed land. A man from Judah named Elimelech chose to take his wife Naomi and their 2 kids to the spot where God had said it was unacceptable. That is a long way from the promised land, where the sons married Moabite women. One was named Orpah, and the other was Ruth. At first, it looked like the family had found peace, but death began to take everything apart in a quiet and persistent way. He fell first, Elimelech. Then his 2 sons died, leaving 3 women in a strange country with no one to help them. Naomi chose to go back to Bethlehem because she was weak and didn't have any money left over. She knew that the famine was over and that the Lord had brought bread to his people. Naomi told her daughters-in-law that they had to stay in Moab to start over with their lives as they went back home. It was hard for Orpah to say goodbye. Ruth, however, shocked everyone by saying, "Your people will be my people and your God will be my God." These words would be remembered for generations. She chose to join a group of people who were legally not allowed to have her because she was a Moabite from a bloodline that had been rejected. This act wasn't just sweet or symbolic, it was a choice of faith. Ruth didn't just want to stay with Naomi, she also wanted to find the God of Israel. She gave up the gods of her land, the chance to start over in Moab, and the safety of the familiar. She chose faith, the unknown, and a life with her mother-in-law, who was poor and angry. Ruth had no idea that the choice she made would lead to something amazing. She didn't just bring hope with her when she went back to Bethlehem with Naomi. She also had the key to a door that had been locked for a long time. A door that the law says should never be opened. But kindness doesn't follow the rules. Grace finds ways around even the toughest walls. And that's where no one thought a Moabite woman would start to change the past of her people and her own life. Ruth's story is just getting started, but it already marks a divine break with the way people normally think. God started to turn things that had been said to be impossible into real proof that His mercy is bigger than any decree. Hearing that God had come to Bethlehem and given people bread made Naomi want to go back home again. Even though she was kind, her heart was broken after burying her husband and sons in a strange place. Not only did she feel sad, but she also felt empty and angry. Because of this, she chose to go back by herself. Before she left, she called her daughters-in-law to say goodbye from the bottom of her heart. She insisted with love that they go back to their families, find new men, and start over in Moab, where things could still go well. Orpah cried. It made sense for her to kiss her mother-in-law goodbye and leave. She did what she thought would make the most sense. She went back to what she knew. It wasn't Naomi's fault. The way was clear. Ruth did not move when she heard what her mother-in-law said, though. Her spirit stayed strong even more than her body. With the strength of someone who had already made up their mind, she clung to Naomi. And from that belief came words that have been used for hundreds of years and are still used today. Don't tell me to leave you or come back from following you. I will go where you go and stay where you stay. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. I will die and be buried where you are buried. May the Lord punish me, no matter how bad, if anything but death stands between us. Ruth 1:16-17. It wasn't just a sign of love. Ruth didn't just stay with her mother-in-law because she felt responsible or kind. In a spiritual sense, she was making a promise. When Ruth said, "Your God will be my God," she openly turned away from the gods of her home country, like Chemosh, the Moabite god. She gave up the idols that her people worshipped and chose to follow Yahweh, the God of Israel. This choice was a deep change of heart that came from faith, not duty. Ruth did not try to make peace with her past because she came from a group that was forbidden by law. She didn't ask to be accepted because she was good or because she was deserving. What she did was give her whole heart. She gave up her faith, her culture, and her planned future in order to join the people of the promise, which was not a promise that she would get, not by birth, but by hope. This decision is even more surprising when you think about the situation. 2 women, helpless, without an estate or security, crossing the road to go back to Judah. Naomi was sad and angry, because she had lost someone close to her, and Ruth had a new faith and a firm choice. One went back to her home country with a broken heart, while the other left with hope in her heart. Going back to Bethlehem wasn't just a trip in terms of geography. It was a movement of the spirit. It was against the law for the Moabite visitor to be there, but she was going toward the land of the God she now believed in. She didn't know it yet, but heaven was already writing her name into a new part of the story of salvation. Never was what the law said, but Ruth's faith told her to say now, and that faith would be kept. As God knows all hearts, the next step was already being planned. A grain field, a meeting with Boaz, and a future that would bring together grace, blood, and an eternal purpose. They only brought pain and hope with them when they came to Bethlehem. They both had no idea what the future held. What Ruth did out of faith, though, set off something much bigger than either of them could have thought. That Moabite woman was about to cross not only the physical borders of Israel, but also the lines set by an old rule that kept her from doing so. She was moving toward the heart of God's plan for rescue as she walked with Naomi. This plan had been built up over many years. Ruth's appearance in Bethlehem brings up a deep and at first glance strange question. If God himself told Moses that no Moabites could come into the gathering of the Lord, how come this story is not only written down but also praised in the Bible? How can we follow the rules strictly while also making room for this foreigner? The truth lies in grace, which is the most beautiful riddle about God. The commandment in Deuteronomy 23 was made in reaction to how people felt as a country. The pact had a direct enemy in Moab as a whole. It used curses instead of gifts and luring instead of being friendly. The limit was set up by God to protect Israel's spiritual character. But even though this rule was strict, it wasn't so strict that it didn't take into account how someone's heart felt. People were safe under the law, but God, who was all-powerful, always saw beyond the written lines and into each person's soul. Ruth's heart was also different. Her faith wasn't just on the surface. She didn't just say sad things to Naomi. They were public declarations that they gave up all phony gods and put their full trust in the God of Israel. She crossed the line of exclusion when she said, "Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." In her heart, she was no longer a Moabite. By faith, she joined the people of the bond. This truth was clear to everyone who saw her. People in Bethlehem soon noticed how well she behaved, showing respect for her mother-in-law and a deep love for her. And by some miracle, her path crossed with that of a good man named Boaz. He had a good relationship with Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. Boaz was not only rich and well-liked, but he was also honest, caring about right and wrong, and devoted to his people's customs. He was amazed by Ruth not only because of how she looked, but also because of her story, her attitude, and what she stood for. Ruth worked in the barley fields by following the path of the crop that had been left for the poor. This was required by the law to protect the poor's honor. As she worked hard to gather, God was gathering something even more important: the return of a family line and the keeping of a promise. When Boaz looked after her and respected her, he saw more than just a stranger. He saw a good woman in her, and her faith was stronger than any opinion he had about her background. Through the spirit of faith, what the law said was not possible became possible. God didn't ignore what he said. Instead, he showed that kindness doesn't cancel out justice. Instead, it meets it in a better way. Ruth did not break the law in any way. She did more than that. Were this possible? Only because God never shut the door on people who really want to find him. Someone was writing a new history of the Moabite woman. And with that, God showed the world that faith, not blood, defines who belongs. Ruth had gone too far and was no longer welcome. She was about to go into the family tree of salvation. In old Israelite custom, there was a holy act that went beyond what people were expected to do. That was the job of the saving relative, a family member who, in times of trouble, took on the duty of making things right. This relative had a job to look out for weaker members of the clan, keep the name of the dead alive, buy back land that had to be sold, and sometimes marry the wife of a dead relative to make sure the threatened lineage had children. Boaz was very familiar with this rule. Besides that, though, he saw something in Ruth that went beyond duty. He saw how much she believed in and loved a God she hadn't known since childhood. She was brave, faithful, and ready to give up everything for him. Boaz chose to save her after seeing how proud she was in the fields, how humble she was in front of Naomi, and how devoted she was. After the proper steps and following the law, he told everyone that he was the one who had the right and the desire to marry Ruth. Boaz and Ruth's marriage was more than just two hearts joining together. They did something to fix things. Naomi's late husband, Elimelech, had a line that could live on. The family's land was kept safe. Even better, Ruth's name, which had once meant being left out, was now a sign of respect and blessing in the Israelite society. She was now a full member of the covenant people. She used to walk the streets of Bethlehem as a stranger. There's more to this story than just a family getting back on track. Every line of this story points to something much bigger. Ruth is more than just a woman who was saved. She is a sign of everyone who was outside the bond, but was accepted because of their faith. It's clear from her life what kindness can do when it finds a true heart. When Boaz extends his hand, it's a picture of something eternal, the work of the Messiah who was to come. From a Christian point of view, Ruth's story is like a prophecy. She stands for the church, which is made up of people from all over the world who have no legal right to the promise made with Israel, but are brought into it by faith. Ruth, a non-Jew, became part of the story of rescue not through blood, but through a spiritual choice. As the one who saved her, Boaz shows her the way to Christ, who is our perfect Redeemer. Boaz took Ruth in, saved her, and made her his wife. In the same way, Jesus came to us, spiritual strangers, and made us part of his family, not because we were bad or because of our family history, but because they loved and cared for us. Grace comes to us just like it did to Ruth. Her story comes before the gospel and shows that God never planned to limit himself to one country, but to include everyone. If you're still not sure how important Ruth's part was, just read the first few verses of the Gospel written by Matthew. In that list, along with the names of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David, there are also the names of 4 women. Ruth is one of them. The author doesn't hide where she comes from. Instead, he draws attention to it. Ruth, the Moabite. The person who the law said couldn't be there became part of the path of the Redeemer. God did not make this choice by accident. It was a sentence. The heart, not where you come from, is what saves you. And if someone has real faith, even the most unusual story can't stop them from being added to God's ultimate plan. Ruth's name in the list of people who were related to the Messiah is not just a strange fact. It is a sign, a divine statement that was written with purpose and meaning. Being named as a relative of David, and by extension Jesus Christ, makes Ruth live proof that God's plan to save everyone, not just people of a certain race or family. The Father's love has always been for all people, from the beginning. For that woman, whose family had a past of pain and rejection, faith went beyond what her background could have taught her. God not only welcomed her because she gave up, he also picked her. Ruth, the Moabite, was left out as a sign. She was put there to be a key link in the royal bloodline that would lead to the birth of the world's Savior. This strong inclusion shows a theme that runs through the Bible. Kindness wins over rejection. Love wins over judgment. Mercy wins over judgment. While God's justice doesn't go away, it does include plans for the future that people can't see. Laws build walls, but kindness opens doors. We have now reached the end of this trip through the Moabites' long-lost past. A sad story that started in a cave tucked away in the mountains, where fear and hopelessness gave birth to a people. An angry, proud, and prideful people who grew up far from God. We saw how the Moabites tried to curse Israel and how they used seduction to hurt the purity of God's chosen people. In response, God made a harsh law that seemed impossible to get around. For hundreds of years, Moab was thought to be a symbol of evil and spiritual danger. The word from God was clear. No Moabites, not even those in their 10th generation, could go into the Lord's gathering. The people's fate seemed to be set by where they came from and the choices they made. The decision looked like it was the end of the case. But God, who is all-powerful, put a seed in the middle of the dry ground. That seed took root in Ruth's heart. She had trust when there wasn't any, loyalty when there was sadness, and the choice to follow God, even though she didn't get any promises in return, changed what seemed set in stone. She was a turning point in the spiritual history of all people. Ruth shows us that where we come from doesn't affect our fate, that a changed heart can break spells that have been passed down. That true faith is stronger than any law. She stands for everyone who has ever felt left out, unworthy, or too far from God. No one is too far away from kindness, as her story shows. Even more than that, Ruth shows us what the church will be like. The church is made up of people from all languages and backgrounds who have been called to join God's family, just like she was accepted into Israel. Just like Boaz saved her, Christ saves us, makes us his bride, and puts us in a plan that will last forever. That's the most important lesson. Ruth's story shows how people can change. It shows that God is not limited by rules made by people or mistakes made in the past. He writes on dirty paper. He takes shame and makes it respect. He also asks us to accept, believe, and walk with him, even when it seems like everything is lost, because grace started where the law stopped. And that kindness, shown through the story of a strange Moabite woman, is still around today. Everyone can be accepted, saved, and changed through Christ. That's what was promised. Ruth is proof of that. The grace of God is greater than any crime, bigger than any term, and deeper than any shame that you carry from your past. In the dark of a cave, there was a sin that turned into a shining witness in a sun-drenched field. The loyalty of a Moabite woman changed the course of salvation forever. The difference between the beginning and end of this story is not a coincidence. It shows how God's heart is. Yes, he is just, but he is also infinitely forgiving. The Mosaic rule, which was completely holy, made it clear what God expected and what would happen if people broke it. It was a real defense against graft and a shield for Israel's moral character. When God said the Moabites couldn't come into the congregation, he was keeping an eye on his people and telling them of how dangerous idolatry is and how countries that have turned their backs on the truth can be. Ruth, on the other hand, crossed that wall not by force, but by trust. Not only did she not fight the law, she also did not try to defend herself or demand support. She just believed. She thought Naomi's God was the real one, that she could live with him even though she was from another country. Her journey wasn't one of taking things over, but of giving up. She gave up everything, and that was enough for God to grab her and put her at the heart of his will for all time. That's what makes Ruth's story so deep. We can learn from it that even though God is fair with nations, he is also kind to each person. Moab was given a group sentence, but Ruth's welcome was personal. Because the Lord knows everyone's heart and will never turn away someone who comes to him in humility and truth. Ruth wasn't just accepted, she was praised. She did more than just pick berries in the fields around Bethlehem. She became part of Israel's heritage. She got married to Boaz and had a son called Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, who in turn fathered David. And from David, the ruling line went all the way up to Jesus Christ, who is King of Kings. By the letter of the law, that woman should never have been in the gathering, but she was added to the family tree of the Messiah. It wasn't a mistake at all. It was God telling everyone that his plan to save them is not limited to human borders or families. That was him showing that his love can fix any mistake. The message comes before the story of Ruth. God can reach anyone, and a new story can begin with a simple act of faith. This is the good news. How often do we not belong, feel like we're not good enough, or feel left out because of our mistakes or where we come from? How often do we feel bad about ourselves when we think about our past? While the past may help us understand our path, it does not decide our fate, as Ruth shows us. It's easy for God to turn shame into purpose, pain into witness, and strangers into children. The Bible could have skipped over Ruth. It might have kept her name secret, tucked away in the background of the story, but God decided to make her stand out. He put her in the company of the great. In doing so, he showed what his plan was all about. Redemption was never about what you did. It was always about God's kindness. Ruth wasn't really a part of it. She only was because she had faith. So she is a picture of all of us who have been joined to the promise through faith in Christ. Her name emerges like a bright light in the book of Matthew. There was a Moabite among the men, an old woman among troops, a stranger who was at the center of Jesus' family tree, not out of ease, but because God wanted it that way. The Bible says, "Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Her whole journey is a picture of that promise. The story of the Moabites isn't just about being judged in the end. It's about having hope. It starts with sadness and ends with forgiveness. It shows how heavy justice is, while also showing how soft kindness is. It tells us that God is very angry at sin, but he is even more angry at hearts that are ready to turn away from it. Many people live with the question, is there still a place for me? Ruth is God's solution to that question, and her life says yes in a clear and beautiful way. It's always been there. There will always be. Tell someone who needs to know that the past doesn't determine the future when God is present. This story that touched your heart. Don't forget to say Amen in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to our station before you leave. We will keep looking into how God's love changes people's lives, their futures, and even whole stories. Thank you for following us to the end of this incredible story. See you in the next video. May God be with you always. Amen.